Hi and welcome to episode 7 of Lockdown Dads. My name's Ian Dinwiddie. I'm a coach. I'm the founder of Inspiring Dads. I'm also the father of 2 children. I've got a 10-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son.
And I'm James Miller, author of Dads Don't Babysit, editor of workingdads.co.uk, and father to 2 children, 2 different children who are aged 12 and 9. And we're delighted this week to be joined by Douglas Ross, MP, Conservative MP for Moray, fully qualified referee / linesman. And if you're wondering, you're thinking, I've heard that name. How do I know him? Well, he's the guy who resigned over Dominic Cummings, if you might have spotted his name in the headlines recently. Given all that, and of course, father to a 15-month-old son, that's quite a lot to be going on. So I'll again, this question gets bigger every week, but for you in particular, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I've been enjoying this podcast. It's interesting times. I was thinking about this question, how am I? And a lot of through lockdown, the current restrictions, apart from not going up and down to London, life was pretty much the same because MPs of all parties were inundated with constituent concerns. Our offices were busier than ever. So actually, you know, we were kept pretty full on. So apart from not being in the House of Commons, not flying up and down to London, life has remained pretty much the same. I just get to do it from the beautiful surroundings here in Moray rather than from my office in 1 Parliament Street.
But I mean, clearly, it's been a busy time for you because we've all been locked down and we all have to deal with the sort of, the mental health elements of that, which are that it's just, just getting up in the morning, it can be boring and the same and all the rest of it. You've also got a 15-month-old, which I imagine lockdown is quite tricky with a child that age. And of course, you hit the headlines. I mean, that's quite a lot to be juggling. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Does the 15-month-old help take your mind off the bit about being in the headlines? Does being able to look out at the beautiful Highlands, does that, soothe your mind when you're in lockdown at all? How do you cope with it all?
Well, definitely. I mean, we're lucky. We live in a rural location here, so normally I do all my Zoom meetings looking out onto the fields around us, but the light's not very good apparently. So you've got this picture of Califer Hill behind us instead. So I do think, where we stay, we're lucky. And, I've heard a lot of people saying, understandably, how difficult lockdown has been if you stay in a flat or, small accommodation. We've got a garden. One of the great things about, having to work from home has been when it all started, my son was crawling and now he's running everywhere. So had I been going up and down to London, I'd have missed a lot of that. So I really did benefit from being here while he kind of developed into walking and running. In terms of, it must be difficult with a 15-month-old, I actually, and I haven't experienced it, but I think it might be more difficult with kids your age because you've got to keep them educated, entertained. With Alistair, he's full on, he's running around, but come 7 o'clock at night, he's sound asleep, and that's him right the way through. And entertainment is us following him around, picking up stones. He loves picking up stones at the moment, and watching Mr. Tumble and Bingleton. So I think we actually get it easier than people who've got kids that are older.
Well, yeah, it's tricky for everyone, isn't it? And I mean, we don't want to get into the politics of it and all the rest of it. But was the Cummings thing? I mean, as you say, you were a junior minister in the Scotland office, which, with all due respect, doesn't usually put you in the headlines, and then suddenly you were for a couple of days. Was that tricky to deal with from a sort of mental health point of view, and when you've got family and all the rest of it, or did you just look at the 15-month-old and sort of forget all the other stuff going on? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I also spoke to my wife about it quite a lot, and she was supportive whatever I did. I could speak to Alice about it as much as I want, and he couldn't really say much back because he didn't understand. But I got some really good advice from one colleague on the day I made the announcement, and it was do your local media, which is Northern Scot, Press and Journal, and STV and BBC Scotland, and they actually put it national as well. But I did no other media, so you're actually the first people to ask me about it because I thought, whatever people think of my decision, I don't want to keep on being a talking head about it days and weeks later. And I turned down Good Morning Britain and 5 Live and all these things that might be quite nice to go on to. But I knew I would be a story for maybe 12, 24 hours, and then it would naturally move on, and it did. And I was quite happy. I made my point, but I didn't want to drag it out and cause any upset or concern amongst colleagues who maybe didn't agree with me. I did it, got it out of the way, and moved on.
There's some good columns in that Press and Journal newspaper. Oh, there's some
Very good.
So I heard, yeah.
Really good columns. Really going to be a really good one next week, maybe. I'm assuming I'm assuming you haven't resigned from any government positions or anything, Ian. So how are you this week?
No. There's been a coup, obviously, internally between my son and my son. My son resisted quite heavily in terms of schoolwork this week, so that's been a bit of a challenge. It's been a bit meh for me this week. Oh, we've got Alistair making an appearance. I hope.
Sorry, he's just through here.
Wow.
Big smile.
He's not quite worked out why he's on the TV yet.
No. My son was watching. So my son's 7, Struan, and he's been watching videos of that kind of age at the moment, and kind of going, it's really, and he's the same. He's like pointing at the screen, going, I'm on the screen, and all this kind of thing. So he's really enjoying. And my daughter, they go back and watch the old videos, and it's really nice to see them go, oh, it's quite cute, or think words to that effect.
It looks a bit different to the last time I saw him, but then it will be, because nobody's been in Parliament for about the last 4 months.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know when that was.
He's fascinated by your beard, I think, James.
Yeah. Kids beards are always sort of fascinating to small children for some reason.
Last one he saw one like that was in the grotto in December. So.
Oh, do you know what? Yeah. Depending on how this economy pans out, that might be me come December.
That might be your job come December.
When I'm 44, we'll be looking back on the year you were Santa, perhaps.
I was thinking about taking it off when the lockdown ends, but I might keep it till December at least. Yeah.
Well, I went 2 days. I went 2 days without shaving this week. Maybe it was 3. And then it annoyed me.
It's interesting you mentioned schoolwork, Ian, because I think that's been the thing this week. Obviously, we'll mention Scotland in just a second, because obviously the rules are different there. But obviously that was the big announcement this week about, primary schools are not going back in England. And I think that was, I don't know, it was mentally quite tricky for the kids, I think I found. That, my son was very much expecting to be going back for a couple of weeks maybe. Yeah. And of course now he's not. And it's a long slog. We've still got 5 weeks through to the summer holidays here. I mean, obviously Scotland breaks up much sooner than that. Yeah. So I think that's been quite tricky. Although, to be honest, I feel a bit like you, Ian, this week. It's been a bit, whatever, it's just another week.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think I've always been expecting September, but wondering whether September was slightly optimistic. But then you have this sort of false hope, and I think maybe it's the hope that they might be going back and doing things, which is almost the biggest thing to kind of manage. I mean, this week I washed both our cars, and I planted a whole load of flowers, and the kids got involved. We weeded the front garden, so it looks lovely. And the cars, which hadn't been washed since way before lockdown, so they just covered it. They were just caked in sort of the Saharan dust, I think, as much as anything. They were looking horrible, and that was quite satisfying, getting out and doing the car. And my daughter got involved with the pressure washer. My son was not so bothered. But
they say gardening is very good for your mental health and all this. A lot of people have been taking up gardening, haven't they? Been turning to the great outdoors and all that. I mean, we mentioned Scotland there. How are you feeling about the rules in Scotland, Douglas? I mean, I've got my mum and I've got a brother there, and I spoke to them both yesterday and detected a certain frustration that while we in England are easing up, and obviously we'll have to wait and see if that is the right decision or not. In Scotland, you're still in Nicola Sturgeon's COVID jail. Is that frustrating for you and frustrating for other people you sort of talk to out there?
I think it is, because, and I don't want to get too political, but overall, the two governments have been pretty much aligned. There has been small differences, but now people are, gradually going back to work. And for some, it's a bit of a concern because they have been, protected at home, and they're now worried about going back into the general population. For others, they're desperate to get back to work, because although the furlough scheme was really good, there's only so many times you can watch everything on Netflix or the Disney Channel or something. So I think some people are really keen to get back to work. And now there's a concern that you read what you're allowed to do in England, what you're allowed to do in Wales, what you're allowed to do in Northern Ireland, and what you're allowed to do in Scotland. And with there being differences everywhere, it's quite difficult, because you can, it's just like you're looking over the fence and you can see it's greener on the other side, and you just want to get moving.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think it's not political any. I think perhaps a few weeks ago there would have been some politics around it, Scottish government, British government, or whatever. But it feels like now it's just, I want to be able to go to the shop. they're going to the shop, I want to go to the shop. It's nothing to do with which government allows me to do what. It's just basically, I want to be able to do what they're doing, you know, and how do we get there?
And a prime example of that was what Ian was saying about, you know, putting in plants. Garden centres in Scotland opened up later than they did in England, and people couldn't quite understand, particularly a garden centre, they tend to be very quick, very large, out in the open for much of it, and people were chomping at the bit to get out in their garden, put in plants. We got some potatoes for our greenhouse, which has been totally neglected since we moved to this house. But because of the restrictions and the fact we're here, you know, we've got these potatoes growing and that. So it was good to be able to do that. But again, we were a few days behind the rest of the country with being able to go and buy them.
Right, here we go. I'm gonna attempt to slightly clunkily move us on to the feature there based on Douglas's potatoes. That doesn't sound too weird. Right, when I'm 64, as ever, haven't got the music, can't afford to pay the Beatles for the song When I'm 64. You just have to hum it in your head. I wonder if that's something. Is that something we're going to look back on in 20 years' time? Are people going to, you know, adopt market gardening in their little patch and stick with it? And will, you know, people are going to start growing more of their own food, and that'll still be the case in 20 years' time? Or is that a really desperate attempt to link?
I think that is a really desperate attempt. I mean, I might still be watering these ones when I'm 64 because they seem to be taking forever to grow. And my dad and my parents are about 6 miles away, and he got the same ones, but he put them in earlier and put in more fertilizer. So he's sending me pictures every night to show how much his potato straws are growing. But I was thinking about, you know, when we're 64 and the things that I think we might look back on, and it will definitely, in my view, it will be things like, you know, social distancing. Will we potentially just never go back to all queuing up the same way we did? You know, it actually doesn't feel too abnormal to just give a bit of distance between you and the person in front of you. My wife, Crystal, was in with Alistair there, and she's not, she's out of earshot now, but on my way home today, it's our anniversary tomorrow. And she wanted this specific present. And on the way back from the airport to Avis here, I stopped off at, I think, 5 different supermarkets to get this present for her. And it took me forever. 1, I couldn't get the thing. And 2, I had to queue up to get into Tesco, to Asda, to Marks and Spencer's. So we just have to adjust. But I think it's something that might be with us for quite a long time.
I mean, I'm trying to think what the present would be that you could get from a supermarket. What is this romantic present? I mean, you know, what, a bag of potatoes, or you know, some cheese strings. I don't know.
It's a special bottle of champagne that I promised her 15 months ago when our son was born, and I thought I was being reasonable by not buying it then because she was breastfeeding. So I thought, don't have this bottle of champagne annoying you that you can't drink. But now 15 months on, I think that excuse is kind of worn a bit thin, and I'm desperately trying to find this bottle, and I have heard there's one in Nairn, which is about 15 miles away, so I might have to do a shop in Nairn tomorrow.
Essential travel. I don't know. No, I think that counts as essential travel. I think.
I'd say so, definitely.
Yeah.
5 years of marriage might be over if I don't get it. So.
Yeah, exactly. Potential fallout, definitely. You got thoughts on when I'm 64, Ian? What have you been thinking about?
God, I was thinking about equality, I think, as much as anything this week, both in terms of Black Lives Matter and in terms of gender equality. So certainly on the gender equality side of things that we talk about a fair bit in terms of our work, is you know, the recognition that it's really, really tricky as workplaces open up. I mean, it's something we've touched on before, but I think it's still out there. I read a Mumsnet thread, and there were some really powerful comments about the struggles that women were having, being left with everything to do, and how difficult that was when workplaces were opening up, but childcare provision and school was lagging behind, and what that'll mean over the summer. I mean, it's something that, you know, James, you and I, James, we talked about previously. There was something really scary that I saw on Twitter. There was that, roughly speaking, I think today, if the kids go back in September, and obviously Douglas, in Scotland, it's slightly earlier than that, and I appreciate that as well. But if they go back in September, today is halfway since they went off school. So I know, yeah, exactly. So it is quite an eye opener, I think, because you forget you've got 6 weeks of holidays. We can't really go anywhere and do things. I'm looking forward to going to the zoo. We are looking at Port Lympne down here in particular, and Howletts are our 2 kind of local zoos that we can get out to in Kent down in this kind of direction. But it's still a long time, as you say, Douglas. It's going to be here for a while. But the equality angle, I think, is really important. People being aware and starting to be aware of their own circumstances and how privileged they might be in their own circumstances, whether that's to do with gender or to do with race. So I think we might look back about how things needed to change. This is the moment when things needed to change. It may not happen straight away, but it's a point, I think, where people are starting to recognizing it.
I think that's sort of what I was thinking about. Related point in terms of the when I'm 64. I mean, one of the reasons I was very keen to get Douglas on is because I think we've mentioned it particularly on this podcast, but I've certainly mentioned it to Douglas, and I've mentioned it before about how there is a group or a certain class, or whatever, maybe that's the wrong word, but there are young Tory MPs who seem to get the fact that dads want to be more involved in family life. I've said it before, it seems counterintuitive in some way. You think Labour would have all the sort of social stuff tied up, and yet it seems to be that there certainly has been a group of Tories who want more paternity leave and seem to get it a bit more about family life and work life and all that sort of stuff. And I just wonder, obviously, COVID is now rather throwing a spanner in the works of any of that sort of agenda going forward. I mean, Douglas, do you think the government does still get that? And is there going to be the potential to drive that agenda forward, given obviously particularly today we've had the figures about the economy going down the pan, although I appreciate those figures are come with massive caveats, because obviously the economy was going down the pan, they turned it off. I mean, that doesn't really tell us anything about going forward. But do you think the sort of the dad's agenda, the family agenda, does this government still get that and will pursue it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And obviously, we look at everything through the prism of COVID at the moment, but this government's, barring anything unforeseen, is going to be in place for the next 4 years, given the majority we've got. And hopefully at some time we can get back to looking at some of these issues. And I think just on paternity leave and such, like next week, Crystal has got a night shift on Thursday. So I'm down in Parliament at the moment, Monday to Friday, because the flights are so bad and infrequent. I can't get home on a Thursday. We can't have grandparents round to look after Alistair or anyone out with the household. So some people will say the government were forced into doing it. Whatever the mechanisms, we now have an opportunity to apply for a proxy vote for me. So I'm actually coming back on Wednesday. Have a proxy vote, so people in Moray are still represented, still have their MP casting a vote. I can get involved in statements and questions, and I can be home here to look after Alistair while his mum, who's a police sergeant, goes into Elgin and takes charge of her team and keeping law and order under her purview in Elgin and across Moray. So I think that's good, and I think I got a note from the Speaker, I think 145 MPs from across all parties have applied for a proxy vote next week, which just shows the interest in this. And again, I think the COVID outbreak will make people think, well, if we did it during COVID, are there other opportunities to look at this going forward?
I guess just the worry there, though, is that obviously there is a perception perhaps that Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't certainly present as a particularly modern sort of chap. Maybe he is behind closed doors, I don't know. There's a perception that he had to be dragged kicking and screaming to this position. Now, I suppose, does it matter that we end up in a good place at the end of it? Or is that a bit worrying for the future that, for example, more paternity leave will have to be forced through rather than, the government embracing it?
I just always think people who say, oh, the government have U-turned or they were brought kicking and screaming, surely we look at the end result rather than how they got there. We welcome the fact that there are now proxy votes for all MPs who have are shielding, are looking after someone who's shielding, or have public health related issues that mean they can't be in Parliament. And the Leader of the House took it on a certain approach, and whether he could have got there quicker or not, I don't think is really the question. It's the fact that we've got there, and this government and this Parliament and this Speaker have been able to put in those arrangements. And in 10, 20 years' time, I think we'll just look back at the way we were able to vote remotely while looking after my son up here in Moray, rather than the vote that took place to allow those votes.
That speaks to the whole When I'm 64 feature, which is exactly that. What are we
that would have been a better
how,
life than the tatties.
Yeah, not how we get there, but where we end up, and hopefully it is with a more family-friendly parliament and workplaces and stuff. When I'm 44, Ian, got any thoughts on what's going to happen in the immediate future?
I was really struggling with this week.
There's a lot of huffing and puffing going on here.
I know. I'm huffing and puffing. I guess when I'm 44, I mean we're on the verge in England. We're on the verge of the football season going back, and I'm really interested in talking about sort of Douglas' experience, your experience, Douglas, about what that's going to feel like for the match officials. So when we think about those empty stadiums and the players and an entirely different environment. Now, I'm not sure how much you're doing or likely to do next season, but football, for me, you're looking back in a year's time, it's football starting again. My son's really, really excited. We're starting to do fantasy league again. So we're plotting our teams, plotting the restart and all those sort of things. And I wonder whether football will be that little moment where we remember when the Premier League started in a year's time. And my question to you, Douglas, is how, as an official in that environment, how different will that likely to be for the player? We know the players will be different because of the crowd, but how different will it be for the officials as well?
Yeah, I've done some games behind closed doors before, whether it was a European game that I remember there was some fans issues in previous rounds, so the home team had been punished by not being allowed to have any spectators. And I think the biggest difference is everything seems a lot worse because a challenge, you can actually hear the crunching challenge, whereas if you've got 50,000 people, that noise, you won't hear it so much. So as an official, you've got to watch and not overreact, and players can also overreact because it sounds a lot worse than it would do if there's the noise of a stadium. But just with the logistics of it all, we were discussing this, the Category 1 referees and the assistant referees who operate in Scotland. We had a Zoom meeting a couple of weeks ago with our head of referee operations, Crawford Allen, and his team. And we're looking to start in Scotland from the 1st of August with the Premiership. And something I hadn't even thought about, we have 4 officials in Scotland, but we might have to appoint more officials because everyone will be temperature checked when they go into the ground. Okay. So you can just imagine, I've been appointed to a game in Glasgow. I drive 4 hours in my car. We don't go to a hotel anymore, so you go straight to the stadium, and it's been a warm drive or something like that, and I get my temperature taken, and I'm at a rest because it's too hot. So we've got to appoint more officials who might never actually officiate the match. So there's a lot of these logistical things that I hadn't even thought about that we're trying to get to at the moment.
Yeah,
and you can't do what is one of the best things in football when the 4th official comes down sick and you have to go, is there anybody in the crowds who's an official or anybody on the staff? Won't be any crowd, so that ain't gonna fly, is it?
A referee in a game I once was officiating at got injured, and I became the referee, so I needed another assistant referee, and it was a G4S security guard who was 65 who ran up and down the line in his security guard outfit with a bib on top as well.
Oh, wow.
So,
The only thing better than that in football is when the ball looks like it's going to go out, but it hits the corner flag. That is the best thing in football. And then they all have to tank it down there because they all think it's going out. I've been to a Palace Arsenal game at the Emirates, and of course, that'll be no different with no crowd because there's no atmosphere at the Emirates. They all just sit there reading their books. They might as well not be there.
We're going to upset the wrong side of London, aren't we?
Bring it. I'll tell you what my when I'm 44, which I think it's quite a good one. That's why I've been saving this one up. Our first guest on this podcast, John Adams, phoned me this week, and I answered the phone, and my son went, "Who is it?" And I was like, "Well, it's John Adams. You don't know who he is." And then whilst I was chatting to John, I heard on the other end his daughter go, "Who is it?" And he went, "Oh, it's James Miller," because she doesn't know who I am. I was like, "Do you know what I'm looking forward to in a year's time? Just being able to answer the phone." Not having sitting around the table with 4 people doing schoolwork and work and all the rest of it. And go, who is it? You don't know who it is. Bug off. It's there's my when I'm 44 that I'm hoping will change in a year's time. Any views on stuff that might change in the immediate future, Douglas, that you can foresee?
I suppose maybe just to follow on from that, a lot of our meetings now are Zoom and such like, which I hadn't even heard of Zoom before the COVID outbreak. And now I worry about what I've got behind me. Have I shaved? This, I even put some aftershave on before this, because in all my meetings I normally go to, I put on after, and it's so stupid that I'm almost more worried what I look like and what's behind me. I've got no bookcase or anything, and I just look forward to the time that we're either meeting physically, so I should be worried about what I look like, or it's the phone, and I don't have to worry if my hair's okay, I've got a beard or not. So it sounds crazy, but that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, it's very much the time of Zoom, and I think we'll all be quite glad to see the back of it now. I think in the early days it was like, oh, this is brilliant, we can all still work the same, and now everyone's like, really zoomed out.
There's some simple pleasures about just having a phone conversation, and then sometimes it's like, do you mind? I've had a call last week, which was, the question was, do you mind if I don't turn the video on? And it's like, no, that's fine actually, and from a coaching point of view, when I work with clients, and I don't like Zoom because there's too many visual distractions for the coaching. So I like face-to-face coaching, but for an actual coaching session, we check in and we say hello on the screen, and then we turn it off. I use Zoom for it, but we then turn the videos off so that we can just listen to the words. Because I think that whole Zoom fatigue is a real thing, isn't it? It's I mean, I shut the bathroom door. There's an ensuite over there. So I shut that. I kick the noisy cat. Sorry, I kick the noisy cat out. The well-behaved Boris, the well-behaved one. He doesn't make a lot of noise, so he's allowed to stay. But Sasha, the other one, he gets kicked out. But yeah, you're just looking at these distractions of what might get in the way.
And the other thing, I just really quickly about Zoom that I found, and particularly when I was a minister, but even now. It's so easy just put a meeting in for an hour, then the next hour, then the next hour. Whereas when we're meeting physically, you'd have a break, you'd be walking between meetings, or you'd be going to see colleagues. I just find from a mental health point of view, we were cramming so much more in because it's easy just to end this call and go on to the next one. And actually, I think when we look back on it, that'd be one of the issues that probably people were ending up doing too much because it was so easy to be connected through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I was on a webinar at lunchtime about the economy and all the rest of it, and Brexit. It was a UK changing Europe thing, and they were talking about productivity, and nobody's doing any looking into this at the moment in terms of, are people actually more productive at home or not, or is it much the same? And I think that sort of feeds into that idea that, if you do go from one meeting to the next, you won't be productive. You will, that walk between meetings actually helps recharge you for the next one or whatever. It's an interesting point to keep an eye on going forward, I think.
Douglas, I was thinking back to the changes in the working pattern in terms of going to Westminster and obviously proxy voting. Do you think there's likely to be, for you personally or for other MPs, certainly who are travelling long distances to Westminster, whether there'll be any longer term change in how you go about representing both your constituency and also being present in Westminster?
I don't think there will be in the long term. I know there's a drive for that, particularly from the SNP. I think, even they would admit that's part of their narrative is they don't want to be at Westminster. I think, in Scotland we elect MSPs who go down to Holyrood and Edinburgh, and we elect our MPs who go down to Westminster. And while you can do some things remotely, it's not as easy as being there physically. So there's this old adage about, we go through the voting lobbies because you can get to meet ministers, etc. I don't think that's as important, but I do think for committee meetings and for sessions of Parliament, you get far more, you can pick up more if you're in the room with a person rather than just looking at a screen. And I think the Speaker announced this week that committees are going to continue to sit virtually until September, and I can understand why, but I think given the great work our committees do, they actually do better work when you're all round the table together, you can see each other's reaction, and you can tease more information out of a witness than you can in a more stilted atmosphere that you have on a Zoom meeting.
My tip this week is get a hat before you do your homemade haircut, because I am having to go around wearing my Nike cap, having done something terrible to the back of my head this week, and I'd like to have had a choice of acceptable hats to wear in all conditions rather than just my golfing cap. So if you're thinking about homemade haircuts, my tip is get a variety of hats first and then do the haircut. Either of you got tips for how to cope with lockdown? What was your experience? Maybe Douglas, what have you experienced, and what's particularly with a 15-month-old? Maybe you've learnt stuff you could hand on.
I don't know. I mean, the one thing I'd like to do, if we stick to haircuts, is I'm desperate to give Alistair a haircut. Now, my wife won't let me because she says you can't use the kitchen scissors. I says, well, you absolutely can. But so to somehow convince my wife that there's not a big difference between our kitchen scissors and the ones that the barber's got. So that's my, somehow to tidy up Alistair's hair, because he's had one haircut in his life. And it's now my dad who's now bald, and I go very curly as our hair gets longer, and Alistair's getting very curly. So I want somehow to be able to cut his hair. That's not really a tip, it's more another frustration of mine.
It's an interesting one. We're having haircut wars in our house because my son's always wanted to grow his hair quite long, and he is at the moment. It's just because he hates getting his hair cut, and I like it nice and short and neat. And I'm like, no, I want to take him to the barber and cut his hair. You know, his hair, it's up to him. Ian, how are you coping with lockdown? What advice would you pass on?
So my tip is not actually lockdown related, but I think it's a tip which I always give to. I don't know whether anyone can hear. My cat, the noisy one, has appeared. I don't think you can hear. Hopefully you can't. He's just standing outside the door going, meow. You can distract me. Okay, so my tip is really about kids and toys and soft toys and their favourite toy. And this is a good one for you, Douglas, if you haven't already done it. So my son had a bear, and we realised that it was the most precious thing in his life. And he still has them. He still has them around. They're kind of beary. We bought 3 of an identical bear. So we always had 2 in a cupboard, so that there's less opportunity to go out and lose them these days. But my top tip is, if you know what your child's favourite soft toy that they cannot live without, is to buy duplicates, because you never know when you might need them. When he was about 4, I think he found the stash and he realised there were 3 bears. He was just like, "There's 3 bears!" He thought it was the best thing ever. But definitely have a replacement bear, or replacement whatever it is of their favourite toy, because if you lose one and you can't get another one, then just the pain.
Good tip.
Well, if I can very quickly say that, we've got one. Alistair's got a Nelly the elephant, and he loves it. He takes it everywhere. He goes to sleep with it. It's got a trunk, so he chews his teeth when he's eating. So we've now bought 2 or 3 of them. But my wife infuriates me because she continues to wash this old scabby one, and we've got to put it in the tumble dryer for an hour to make sure it's ready for. I said, just use one of the other ones, but she won't go into her supplies. She wants to. She won't break the glass unless it's an emergency, and we've not got to that stage yet. I want her to rotate them more.
I'm with her. I think that's quite wise, particularly in lockdown. You don't need any more stress. Save it up. You never know when you might need it.
Thank you everyone for joining us for this episode number 7 of Lockdown Dads. You can visit our website. It's at inspiringdads.co.uk with a big orange button in the top right hand corner. You can listen to this. You can watch this, listen to it there. You can watch and listen to all the previous episodes and give it a like and a share. My name's been Ian Dinwiddie.
And I've been James Miller, and so thank you for joining us, and thank you for Douglas. Thank you to Douglas for joining us. Stay safe, and come back next week for another show. Thanks, bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.